Suprememagus, Chapter 95, Dimensional Magic Part 2. The idea of teleportation was first born after realizing the limitation of flying. As you all should know, it is impossible to move in such a way an army or its supplies. It's not a matter of mana required, as much that would take too much time. Not to mention it would offer a perfect target for an ambush, since non-mages would be sitting ducks. The first idea was just move a body much faster, but above a certain speed threshold, dust becomes dangerous as an arrow, insects hit like an avalanche. Adding a barrier strong enough to endure such hazards would make the mana consumption prohibitive, even for a small group of persons. So, some dumb idiot who read too many fairy tales had the idea of teleportation, as in covert living matter in something else that could sustain high-speed traveling and reverting it back once arrived to destination. Rude laughed loudly, like it was the best joke ever, but when he noticed he was the only one laughing, his upper lip curled in an expression of disgust. "How can you possibly be that dumb? Do you really not understand?" he asked without receiving any answer besides puzzled look. "In a fairy tale is great, but in reality, converting living matter into something else is just a fancy word to say killing. How can you be sure that the thing that arrives on the other side is really you? What if a part of your body, your mind, or soul gets lost? How do you think you could get it back? And more importantly, would the newborn thing even notice not to be the original? One thing is teleporting a rock, but living beings are much complicated." Interesting, Lee thought. It's the same moral conundrum theoretical physicists had about teleportation back on Earth. Someone even made a Hollywood movie about it. And don't let me get started about the necessity of having perfect coordinations. Professor Rudd continued. Rematerialize a little too high, too low, or too close to a travel companion and bam, instant death. Not to mention that the aforementioned insects, dust, and even animals are not bound to make space for your arrival. The tiniest hitch and you have a fly for brains. The last mage that attempted teleportation materialized in the sky, hoping to avoid such issues, only for a flock of ducks to cross his path, making him die like the quack he was. This time part of the class laughed at the dark humor. "What I'm going to teach you is the art of manipulating space itself, allowing you to arrive from a point A to point B in complete safety in an instant, even if two places are thousands miles away." Professor Rudd waved his hand in a circular manner, and soon two tiny black spots appeared, the first one between his palms, and the second one right in front of the girl sitting in the middle front row. With each magic word he spoke, the spots started to enlarge and stretch themselves in a specular manner. One extremity became almost circular, the size of a fist, while the other was so thin and small to be pointed-like. They assumed the shape was of a funnel, made out of energy, with both ends spinning at unbelievable speed. "Is that even horizon?" Lit was shocked, to the point of standing up to better observe the phenomenon. After just a second, the energy funnels had collapsed on themselves, leaving in their places two rifts in space. Professor Rudd extended his hand inside the first rift, making it appear right above the girl's desk. taking the pen away from her fingers. Do you understand now? Bending space requires the same amount of energy and focus than teleportation would, but it's infinitely safer. Walking through a gate is like going through a door. What gets in, gets out, no more and no less. But not to get fooled by appearance. Even a simple trick like the one I just showed you has many limitations. First of all, it requires a clear line of sight. Otherwise, one cannot have a clear focus of the entry and exit points. Secondly, even a small gate requires at least the ability to triple cast, since you have to mix and control the energy of earth, air, and magic water. Those are the most basic elements for a gate. Adding more elements allow to create bigger rifts, and it's the only way to make them stable enough to let more than one person walk through it. You will need to develop a deep understanding of these three elements, just for starters. Despite what you may think, dimensional magic does not require enormous amount of mana, like some specialization do. The most important requirement is sensibility to small fluctuation of energy and space. It's not something that you can brute force your way through. You must be able to feel the gate growing and adapt to its changes. If you don't feed it mana at the right time in the right place, it will never open. Dimensional magic is not a specialization. It has no strict requirements that cannot be overcome with practice and hard work. On paper is something that every good mage can do, even those with one specialization or none at all. Tomorrow we will start with nothing more than a simple parlor trick. Should open two small portals barely the size of a coin, one above the other. Then he dropped a small pebble in the lower portal and it reappeared from the upper one, falling down in the lower portal in an endless loop. Forewarned is forearmed. Better if you start reading your book from today onward, if you don't want to start with the wrong foot. Questions? Uriel raised his hand, receiving permission to speak. Professor, you said that teleportation does not exist. But what was Blink then? I didn't see any gate opening. Excellent question, young man. For the first time he had entered the room, Professor Rudd smiled kindly. Many were cursing inwardly, asking themselves if the question was really good, or rather he was appreciating Uriel's father. Dimensional magic is not just a matter of logistic and transportation. It's the right condition. Is also a perfect tool to defend or attack. But in such scenario, you cannot expect the enemy to be kind enough to wait for you to finish. Everything needs to be fast. Allow me to show you Blink again, this time slowly. The Academy ring of Ruth's finger tapped into the castle magic, opening two portals, one in front of the professor and the other in the middle of the class. But, unlike Warp Step, where both ends were, the portal in front of Ruth moved forward, making him arrive to destination without having to take a step. That's how Blink works, just much faster. Using a dimensional magic in combat is the final test of skill for a mage. Another useful but even harder application is the following. Please stand up, young man. Uriel did as instructed, but as soon as he stood up, he found himself watching Professor Rudd standing behind his desk, while he was now in the middle of the room. This spell is called Switch. The name is self-explanatory and requires two sets of portals that is correctly timed create the perfect diversion, sometimes even an opportunity to kill. Back in my days, I once found myself surrounded by archers using enchanted arrows. Their commander did me the favor of standing still long enough for me to time switch so that while I was running away, he had become a fine spill cushion. A cruel smile appeared on Ruth's face, remembering the shocked expression of the soldiers when they realized what had happened. But don't get me wrong, switch is even harder to pull off than blink. It requires that both targets are still within a 10 meters distance and a clear visual. But I digress. Anything further? Is it really possible for a single mage to open a gate to a location hundreds, if not thousands of miles away? Asked a petite girl. Yes and no. A single mage can open a portal leading to a very further destination, but he needs to have either enough mana to support the task or a magical item to share its burden. Also, one cannot go in a location he has never been before. Visualization is a key element, and so is the knowledge of the exact coordination. Moreover, opening such a gate requires a focus, something like this. From his dimensional amulet, Professor Root took out a small sphere with many arcane red runes engraved on it. Dimensional mages usually plant magical beacons in their most common destination, making the opening of a portal much easier and less mana-consuming. As I said at the beginning of the lesson, my subject is really complex. It's better to avoid filling your heads with useless notions. Focus at the task at hand. One must first learn how to crawl, then to walk, and only then can worry about his running speed. Dismissed. Almost at the same moment, the gong signaling the end of the lesson resounded. Many students had worried looks on their faces, and Lit was one of them. This is really bad. Not only I have never practiced anything like this, but sensibility is not exactly my strong point. Whenever I encountered a difficulty, I either cheated my way in with true magic until I understood the true core of the problem, or relied on fake magic autopilot to understand the magic's flow. What's the average success rate per year for this course? According to the Academy's records, it's less than 60%, Solus replied. How many graduated students manage to score an A despite failing it? Lit was considering dropping the subject to avoid it affecting his grades. He could always copy the book and study at his own pace later. None. The answer left him dejected. Turn that frown upside down. Even the most experienced kid here has barely 6 years of magic practice. You have more than 12, not to mention the hex casting and true magic. I know, but practice is not all. This seems a discipline that requires quite a lot of talent, and we both know I'm no genius. Invigoration and true magic cannot help me like they do for forge mastering and healing. I'm afraid I have just hit a wall.